Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen and I'm the program manager for the Recycling Market Center and will serve as your moderator today. The focus of today's webinar topic is repurposing discarded materials. Our presenter today is Damon Carson, who I will introduce in a moment. Following his presentation, we will conduct a question and answer session. If you have a question or comment, please use the Q&A feature box located on your control panel on your screen. You may also use the chat feature to request assistance if you're experiencing technical difficulties during the webinar. Please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and PA Recycling Market Center websites. Please note that Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center, its affiliates, its funders, and the National Recycling Coalition assume no liability resulting from the use of any information provided during this webinar. This webinar is only provided as an informational tool, and no discrimination is intended and no endorsement by these organizations is implied. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Damon Carson is the founder and president of Repurposed Materials. Damon educates and entertains audiences across America with presentations on repurposing that is equal parts magic show, game show, preschool class, and science class. His repurposing mission and concept has been featured in the likes of the Chicago Tribune, the Dallas Morning News, and the Denver Post. His company has locations in Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, and Philadelphia. To date, Repurposed Materials has helped a number of organizations including the U.S. Army, Denver Broncos, City of Chicago, Nestle's, BNSF, Railroad, Oklahoma State University, Purina, U.S. National Forest Service, Campbell Soup, State of Wyoming, Paramount Pictures, and many, many more. So at this moment, I'd like to turn the program over to Damon.
Thanks, Wayne. We're going to jump in with a little magic show. I'm going to show you a waste stream of one industry, and then we're going to do a little hocus pocus and turn it into something else. So we're talking about the big mining tires. They're 10 feet tall. These are the surface mines out west, Wyoming, Nevada, etc. It's a wear part. End of life, it comes off. What do you do with these big, huge mining tires? Hocus pocus, you slice them in half like a bagel, fill that center hole with concrete, and you have a water tank for your cattle out in a pasture that'll last 50 to 75 years. Next up, this is West Coast, Cal Berkeley. They were replacing their gym floor. This one is about 20,000 square feet. They cut it out into 4x8 sections that you see in the lower right, and they were done with it. What happens to that old gym floor? A little hocus pocus. And this feature wall at the back of a restaurant, they took it apart board by board, and as you can see, when they reassembled it, the 3-point lines, the free throw lines made a whimsical backdrop for a feature wall at this restaurant. It just so happens this restaurant was one of the new ones in the Chicago, so it was very fitting that it would be a basketball court on the feature wall or back wall at the restaurant. Next up, street sweeper brushes. What we're specifically talking about is the red brush, kind of the perpendicular brush. It's a tube broom. It's about 6 feet long. Starts out about 36 inches in diameter. It's a wear part as it spins and flicks dirt up all day long on the streets. It becomes smaller and smaller. When it's about 22 to 24 inches in diameter, they get retired. No longer a big enough diameter to catch the ground anymore. So typically these are landfilled because it's got a center core of steel and the bristles are plastic, but there's not enough material of either type of plastic or steel to make it worth breaking apart, so they end up typically in the landfill. A little hocus pocus, and that old street sweeper becomes a back scratcher for livestock. In this case, a horse. We sell them to a lot of zoos around the nation. If you go to the Bronx Zoo in New York City, and the rhinoceroses seem to have a smile on their face, if you'll look in a corner, there's probably an old street sweeper brush back there that they can scratch what itches them. So that's big and industrial, but if we go back to preschool, this whole repurposing thing is something we're kind of born with. Old Quaker Oats cylinder, First Life protected the oatmeal from factory to store, store to home. When you dumped out that last bit of oatmeal when you were a kid or had kids, did that Quaker Oats cylinder ever go right to the recycle bin? Probably not. You made a drum out of it, you made a vase out of it, you made some craft out of it. Same concept, bigger scale. When mom and dad brought home the Maytag refrigerator, did that big cardboard box ever go right to the recycle bin? Of course not. You, as a child, your imagination ran wild. You made a fort out of it, a playhouse. In this case, a rocket ship. What's interesting is most kids are kind of born with that resourceful repurposing gene, but in America, in the land of abundance, where we're 3 clicks away from getting anything brand new, then we kind of, over time, get away from our resourceful genes that we're kind of born with. So let's set the stage. Where do we fit in? Where does repurposing fit into the famous reduce, reuse, recycle triangle? Certainly for the last 40, 50 years, recycling has got the most love. We all know what recycling is. It's chip it, shred it, grind it, melt it. Notice the red strike throughs. That's not what repurposing is. There's absolutely good things and good reasons to recycle, chip, shred, grind, melt, but that's not what repurposing is. So we're more on the reuse side, but typical reuse is a boat, a forklift, and a refrigerator. There's a used secondary market for all 3, but in a second life, a boat typically stays a boat, a forklift, and a refrigerator stays a refrigerator. Repurposing, again, is a offshoot of reuse, but it is not the same. Repurposing, you get a different second life. So let's go through and talk about some familiar repurposes. These are, again, so common that you don't really even think about them, but old wine barrels from the Napa Valley, end of life after 1 or 2 uses of storing wine, you slice them in half and they become planters. Again, very common. Probably some of you in the audience have those in your backyards. Old tires. Now we talked about the big mining tires, but smaller passenger car and truck size tires. If you live around waterways, ports, hocus pocus, those old car tires, truck tires become bumpers or fenders on, in this case, a tugboat, docks, piers, etc. Again, not why Goodyear and Michelin made them, but it's a good extended life or repurpose. The shipping containers, 20 foot, 40 foot, in the last 10, 15 years, have become kind of all the rage for any HGTV watchers. They make tiny houses out of them. So again, not why they were created by the fabricators. They were created first life to haul cargo across the oceans, but they can get a beneficial reuse / repurposing as a tiny house. So let's go into some less familiar. Those first 3 that we just talked about were things you've probably seen before, nothing new, nothing too exciting. We might now venture into things that are less common. So old advertising billboards, Budweiser, Chevrolet, Coca-Cola on the sides of the highways, byways of America, just a waterproof piece of vinyl with a big printed picture. If you can imagine, let's say today is hypothetically February 15th. What was yesterday? Well, in the hypothetical scenario, yesterday was Valentine's Day, February 14th. So for 4 to 6 weeks, all the billboards in America implored us gentlemen to buy our leading ladies a diamond ring, flowers, etc. But now it's February 15th. These all come down, the ad campaign's over, and these billboards, big pieces of waterproof vinyl with big pictures on it, are obsolete to primary industry. Hocus pocus, they make a great tarp for covering, in this case, building materials. Hay stacks for livestock owners. They make great pond liners, all kinds of things that old billboards get a second life or repurpose doing. Stadium bleachers, aluminum bleachers. Most of these, they get replaced for ADA compliance reasons. If you're a fan or casually watch NASCAR unfortunately has seen a tremendous decline in attendance. They are taking out tens of thousands of bleacher seats at the NASCAR racetrack stadiums because as they show and air motor broadcasts of the races, they don't want to show a bunch of empty seats. So they're removing these aluminum planked bleachers. Again, most people just think, hey, send them to recycling. Again, nothing wrong with that, but what's the highest and best use? Reuse is always on the hierarchical environmental hierarchy, the best thing to do. So hocus pocus, instead of melting them down, in this case, it was used as kind of architectural salvage. So this is an interior wall siding or cladding and makes a really fun, whimsical architectural detail. So from athletic waste to architectural find. Big military cargo parachutes, 35 feet, 64 feet, and 100 feet in diameter. So these are not the parachutes that skydivers use, individual people, but this is the parachutes that hold tanks, big pallets of rations, jeeps, etc. They only get deployed a time or two by the military organizations, and then they get retired. Well, what happens to that? Hocus pocus, they become, in this example, a shade canopy at a outdoor theater venue. So again, a very different second life or repurpose. So how do we get these crazy ideas on how things can get a very different second life? So I have an insomnia problem. I get all kinds of crazy trade journals, just industry magazines, in this case, Wire, Rope, and Sling Technology News. Probably most in the audience never even knew this magazine existed. The reason I get the magazines is I like to look through and see what products are being purpose-built new, that there is a used product out there that is eerily similar. Upper left, maybe it could be substituted. In this case is a sling guard protector. So this is a high value sling holding this big metal coil. So the company makes a sock or a sleeve, tough jacketed material to protect the higher dollar sling. So basically, as I said, it's just a tough fabric that's acts as a sock or sleeve. Where in America are thousands, tens of thousands of feet of tough jacketed material, hose-like material being discarded every year? Hocus pocus, fire departments throw away miles and miles and miles of fire hose every year. So when you think about it, could these old 100-foot, 50-foot fire hoses be cut up into 3-foot, 6-foot, 9-foot lengths and substituted as a sling guard protector? The answer is, yeah, maybe. We sell a lot of it for that, for different applications other than fighting a fire. Next up, this will show you the severity of my insomnia, but I also subscribe to Poultry USA. So it's a magazine about raising young chickens and eggs, etc. So it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but the middle one is a DuraPad. So that's 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting. The sole purpose of this 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting is they roll that out underneath the laying hen's cages. And when the hen lays her egg each day, it just provides a cushiony substrate so the egg doesn't crack. Pretty simplistic. So then we ask, where in America are hundreds of thousands of square feet of 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting being landfilled every year? We have any sports fans in the audience? It's the turf from the modern day football fields and soccer fields and baseball fields. It's basically just 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting. After enough 250-pound linemen with cleats run up and down the fields, after 6, 7, 8 years, they retire this. But again, it's still 1.5-inch plastic shag carpeting. We're not suggesting or saying it will work as nest pad in the poultry industry, but basically we're saying, could it work? Could it be substituted? So what's interesting is a lot of people think that somehow this repurposing concept is new, is unique. If we go back to post-World War II, so we talked about parachutes in an earlier slide, but when the GIs left Italy, they left behind lots of unused or used parachutes, a very enterprising Italian population. When we think about Italy, they repurposed them as canopies to put underneath their olive trees. And so when they would shake the trees, they would all the olives would fall onto these parachutes, and it made for a quicker, more efficient collection method. So again, first life dropped soldiers out of airplanes. Second life became a good tool to make harvesting of olives more efficient. We'll skip ahead a couple of wars. So this is Vietnam War. So what we're looking at is the thing that looks like a bomb underneath the fuselage. In fact, that's not a bomb, it's a fuel tank. So when they needed to get extra deep into military territory, they would put on this external fuel tank to provide them a few extra minutes or hours of flight because of the extra fuel. When they would get into deep into enemy territory, when this extra tank would run out of fuel, they would just jettison it and it would just fall to the ground deep in the jungles. So there we were, Vietnam, Cambodia, all these jettisoned fuel tanks, steel fuel tanks, littering the jungles. Hocus pocus, enterprising locals would carve them up into canoes and rafts to go through the tributaries and the rivers across the Southeast Asia. So again, and I've been told, not been there, but many of these still exist 40, 50 years later. So very enterprising people there in the jungles of Southeast Asia. So what makes a material a candidate for repurposing? This is kind of the academic portion of the program, SAVE. First up is standardized. The more standardized a waste stream, the more it's a candidate for repurposing. We'll take lumber, for example. If you have a pile of 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s that are 32 inches, 44 inches, and 67 inches, that's just kind of a random pile of lumber versus, hey, in our industry, we have all 2x6s and our cutoffs are all 32 inches long. And all 100 or 1,000 of them are that exact same dimension. That's uniform, that's standardized. Much easier to find a home for a standardized uniform waste stream than something that's random. The A is availability. Is this a one-time waste stream like we have 100 of these one time, or is this a waste stream that every week, back to the lumber example, we cut off 32-inch 2x6s. So this week we have 100, and next week we're going to have 100, and 4 months from now we're going to have 100. So it's always more appetizing to have recurring waste streams. So once you figure out a repurposed form, there's more material coming behind it. So example would be the advertising billboard vinyls that get used as hay covers, pond liners, etc. So they may not be changing out billboards today in St. Louis, but they may be changing out billboards today in Atlanta or Dallas. So every time billboards get changed out, there's more of them available. So once you develop that pipeline or that repurpose, there's more coming behind it. The V is versatility. We actually use it in conjunction with 3 words: generic, versatile, and adaptable. Generic, versatile, and adaptable. If you are in a room or an office right now and you look around, there are things, probably a desk you're sitting at or a chair you're sitting on, I would say are pretty specialized. Kind of goes back to the forklift, the boat example. A chair will always be a chair, a table will probably always be a table. Versus there's probably a door in your room. You take the doorknob off of the door, take it off its hinges, you have just a structural piece of wood or metal, depending on your environment, that could be used as a shelf or a bridge or all kinds of interesting things. If you have ceiling tiles, you know, the 2 foot by 4 foot grids, ceiling tiles could be brought down, different things. If you have windows, you've got glass. I would call glass generic, versatile, adaptable. Lots of things you can do with a piece of glass. So again, generic, versatile, and adaptable. Why is this so important? Let's take these roofing tiles as an example. So these are on the flat roofs of school district buildings, warehouses across America. Notice flat on top. corrugated or fluted on the bottom. So when it rains, it gives channels or a way for water to exit the roof to the gutter system and down to the road, gutters, etc. So generic, versatile, adaptable. If it's those three things, then different industries can look at it very differently as a solution to different problems. Kind of the obvious one here, the landscape industry would put it flat side up as pavers in a backyard, a gardenscape in this case. Interestingly, and by contrast, you show this to a livestock owner, it's completely opposite. He flips it. That corrugated or fluting actually serves as traction or cleats, so his livestock do not fall, slip, etc. in the muck and the mire of everyday life of an animal. So again, generic, versatile, and adaptable is very important to being able to find a very unrelated second life. E is engineering. We talk about attributes, characteristics, and engineering, ACE for short, ACE. So what did the product do in its first life? Was it hollow? Was it magnetic? Was it UV protected? All these things are its attributes, characteristics, and engineering for life number one. Can be clues, can it be substituted where those same characteristics and engineering are needed in a second life? Let's go back to an earlier example. Most stock tanks, water tanks, are made out of galvanized metal, upper left. You notice you can put a brand new galvanized tank out in a pasture and a 1,500-pound bull can get in there and have a little 8-second rodeo. And within the first week, that is destroyed. Versus, and by contrast, the big mining tires, 10 foot, 8 foot, 12 foot tall, have 2 and 3 inches of rubber and steel. Now, Goodyear and Michelin didn't put those characteristics and attributes engineering into those tires to make them a great water tank. They put that engineering there to hold up a very, very heavy truck in a rocky environment. That's why they put the engineering in. It just so happens that that same engineering, you can, again, slice it in half like a bagel, put it out in a pasture. A 1,500-pound bull and his brother could get in there and not just have an 8-second rodeo, but a 30-second rodeo or a 60-second rodeo. Kicking, kicking, kicking. And it's not going to hurt. 2 and 3 inches of rubber and steel that were put in there because of life number one. So again, attributes, characteristics, engineering. Another example is 30 and 40-year-old rail cars. So these are the flat cars. What do you have present here? How could these be repurposed? Most of these obsolete to primary industry rail cars just get cut up into 3-foot links. They get melted at a big facility and they get made into a car. That's called recycling. But you take the axles away, you take the hitches away, and you have all the characteristics and attributes of a bridge. After all, in life number one, all those steel girders were just bridging 2 axles. In the lower right, you put those, take away the axles, or trucks as they call them in the railroad industry, and put these on a couple of abutments over a creek, and you have a bridge. So rather than taking an all-rail car, cutting it up, sending it to a mill, having it melted down, having it sent to another steel mill, made into brand new I-beams, and then sent back out and a new bridge built, why don't we just keep it as is and just redeploy it or repurpose it? So SAVE. So those make good candidates for repurposing. Just because something's a good candidate for repurposing doesn't mean it's going to be commercially successful. So let's talk about some things that are good candidates but will never be commercially successful. So we already talked about how parachutes are a great repurposable item. I didn't tell you before, but the #1 buyer of old military cargo parachutes are brides for backyard weddings. They hang them in the trees as shade canopies for the reception and or the wedding. So again, that's a great commercial success. So you look at these hot air balloons, very similar fabric, colorful. Think about the SAVE grid, standard sizes, available. There's always hot air balloon fabric being retired, generic, versatile, adaptable. The engineering, it's basically all the same as a parachute, but for one reason, these will never be commercially successful. And if we were live, I would ask for ideas from the audience, but we can't do that in a webinar scenario, so I'll just tell you. The reason is because at end of life, they absolutely reek. So just think about a hot air balloon's life. Moisture condensates on them while they're in the air. They land on somebody else's property. They quickly fold up the balloon to get off the property so they don't scare the animals, etc. The parachutes are never allowed to properly dry. The fumes from the propane. You talk to any hot air balloon pilot at end of life, these absolutely reek. Some have even said they're like vomit bags. So again, parachutes, second life, they're at a backyard wedding. Could you imagine sitting under a hot air balloon fabric now, given what I've told you, and you're looking around for who didn't wear their deodorant to the wedding? So again, good candidate, not commercially viable. Another fun one, American Airlines, even though this is a picture of a Southwest Airlines plane. So on about 2 jetliners a week, they replace the inflatable slides. So here's a picture at a DFW hangar. This is what they sent me. And I looked at that and I said, oh my gosh, that would be a great party barge behind a speedboat on a lake. How much fun could you have with one of these? And interestingly, generic, versatile, and adaptable, you show these to multiple industries. Other industries look at it very differently. Women told a great story to my wife, and one zookeeper said they would make a great fall pad. So when we put the big animals to sleep, to do procedures on them. So again, fall pad. Again, I go to zoos, I'm out front looking at the animals. I'm not behind looking at what's going on operationally at a zoo, but you show a zookeeper this, and that's how he thinks about it. Again, went home to tell my wife this tremendous repurpose story. I said, Tracy's my wife. I said, Tracy, when these evacuation slides, when they anesthetize the big animals, they could make great fall pads. And she just starts tearing up. And she said, Damon, that's a terrible story. That's so sad. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, they're killing the big animals. And I said, I didn't say euthanize. I said anesthetize. So when they put the animals to sleep, again, a great fall pad. But it's just so fun as different industries look upon things that are generic, versatile, adaptable, how many different ideas they come up with on how to give them a second life. They can't be repurposed though, because FAA rules, they have to be certifiably destroyed. They have to be shredded. That is an FAA mandate. As a repurposer, very, very sad. I mean, I understand it. There's a reason the FAA mandated they be replaced. They don't want these ending up on some third world airliner that they may not function properly. But again, as a repurposer, it's heartbreaking to think something that's such a good candidate for repurposing has to be shredded. Escalator handrails, this is another one, miles and miles and miles of this getting retired every year. It's generic, versatile, adaptable. We work through the whole grid, perfect candidates. But for whatever reason, it's just tough to find a commercial market for these. The number one idea for these is landscape edging. But in this case, I think it breaks down economically. So let's say, hypothetically, metal landscape edging at Home Depot or Lowe's is 10 cents a running foot. Unfortunately, you can't even ship escalator handrail for 10 cents a running foot. So again, will probably work perfectly, but are people, Americans, going to pay 50 cents for escalator handrailing for landscape edging when they can get metal landscape edging for 10 cents? It just, again, breaks down economically. So again, good candidate, probably not going to be commercially viable. So what's fun is if we take this mission concept of repurposing and thinking about characteristics, attributes, engineering, I mean, we can really blow this up and go beyond just durable materials. So we can move into food. Sugar, we did a deal with Miller Coors Brewing. They brought in a bunch of sugar from Hawaii for a specialty beer. It expired on the shelf. They could no longer use it as for food consumption because of the expiration. We found a home for it, hocus pocus, with a beekeeper. He made sugar water out of it for his bees to supplement their diet when the flowers weren't blooming. You know, at the time of sale, I was very upfront, said, now you realize that the sugar is expired. And he just very matter-of-factly retorted, do you think the bees care? In fact, they don't care. Again, another fun one, cheese. So moldy cheese, rotten cheese, off-spec cheese. Tons and tons of cheese is thrown away, discarded in America every year. But what industry actually buys new cheese and lets it sit on the shelf and rot to make their product? They actually need rotten cheese to make their product. Hocus pocus, any fishermen, anglers in the audience? So stink baits, cheese baits, trout, catfish. Again, it's just funny how on one side of the street, an industry could be throwing away something that's obsolete, no good to them. And on the other side of the street, they're buying that same product brand new because they're not communicating across the street. You apply this to real estate. So these are the salt mines, big in central Kansas, eastern Pennsylvania, big salt mines. They go in and make these cavernous rooms. When all the salt is extracted, they abandon the mine. So there's just these big open spaces underground. Little imaginative thoughts, and I think about what's present in a salt mine. Again, attributes, characteristics, engineering. Security, it's underground. Stable temperature, stable humidity, all the things real estate developers spends hundreds of dollars a square foot to produce, to make new above ground for document storage. So many of these old salt mines have been reclaimed and or repurposed into document storage facilities. So again, you're just getting attributes, characteristics, and engineering on the cheap, if you think about that substitutionary mentality. So airliners, this is a fun one, FAA rules. So FAA rules say a gallon of high-end aircraft paint has to be used within 24 months of manufacture. So at 1 year, 364 days, you can open that gallon of paint and paint an Airbus or a Boeing plane. At 2 years and 1 day, brand new unopened paint has to be sent out as hazardous waste, just FAA rules. But you think about attributes, characteristics, and engineering. I mean, this isn't just your household latex paint. Think about the paint, what it has to do in life, number one. It has to be able to survive 500-mile-an-hour winds. It has to be able to sustain temperatures from probably 150 degrees on a hot Phoenix tarmac to -50, -100 when they're going over the North Pole at 35,000 feet. Highly engineered paint that just, again, if it passes its expiration date, no longer good to primary industry. Probably plenty good enough paint for a metal building in some community in America. But again, does Airbus, does Boeing sit around and really think about, man, who's painting a metal building today? Maybe this paint could be substituted. Nope, they typically just send it out as hazardous waste because we in America, that's just kind of how we do things. So that kind of brings us to the end, about time for questions. We often get asked, does the concept mission of repurposing make more sense environmentally or economically? Well, of course, for companies getting rid of stuff, like the paint, it makes great sense environmentally. To a buyer of anything used, whether it's used clothes, used cars, you know, you typically save 50 to 75% over buying new. Said another way, repurposing is kind of at the intersection of affordability and sustainability. So with that, Wayne, that kind of concludes the formal. So however you want to handle the Q&A at this point.
All right. Thank you, Damon. Great presentation. So I'll bring it up now for questions. If you do have a question, just type it in the Q&A feature. So we don't have any right now, but we should be getting some in soon. But I'll pose one for you, Damon. You have a number of facilities across the country. Have you noticed any difference from location to location as far as there's a bigger demand for a certain product on the East Coast versus West Coast, and just general availability of materials that you can acquire for your stores?
Yeah, I think a really good example of that is turf from the football field. So, and I'll demonstrate it in two different ways. You think about in the Western United States, more arid environments, there's a lot more demand for turf because we don't have water. We want something green. We don't want the mud. Versus East Coast, everybody has plenty of water to grow grass on any patch of virgin soil. So definitely more demand out west for turf than back east. Flip side, on the supply side, landfills are very cheap in the Western United States because we have lots of open room. So turf contractors are saying, hey, you just take, you can have it, take it, we're happy to give it away. On the East Coast, especially the Northeast, where landfill tipping fees are so expensive, many contractors will actually pay us to take the turf because, it's cheaper than the landfill. So again, there's two very different variables geographically, supply and demand on one singular product.
Okay. So here's a question. How long will you let an item sit in your inventory before you have to give it up in landfill? And do you take on this risk, or do you share the risk with the company that gave you the waste product?
So when we make deals, I would say 98% of the time we don't do deals on consignment. So back to Miller Coors and the sugar example. We bore the risk. We said we made an offer. We took that product into inventory. Miller Coors, they weren't going to get called back in a year or a week. Come and get it. We can't find a home for it. We brought it into one of our warehouses. We took the risk. Second part of the question is, how long do we sit on things? Kind of the old joke is we like to not have inventories, have a birthday on our lot, but sometimes they do. Sometimes it just takes time, or sometimes the quantity is so great that, you have incremental demand. The waste stream is so large, it might take you 12, 24, 36 months. I would be proud to say in our 9 years of doing this, we have sent very few roll-offs to the landfill. I mean, it's typically just economics. You just keep discounting it until finally it's a match economically with somebody.
This one sounds like a challenge to you. So it says film cameras, from 1930s Kodak Brownie box camera to the 1950s Kodak with all the settings to manage, to a late 1950s Ansco Cadet, to a 1990s high quality point and shoot cameras. Nobody seems to want them, either to create a museum display or to use. Any ideas?
So I would say, back to our SAVE, I would say, and again, our mission concept is repurposing. I would say it's not a good candidate for repurposing because it's very specialized, opposite of generic, versatile, and adaptable. So strictly from the repurposing mindset, I would say, mercy, I'm waving the white flag. That would not be one we would be able to help with.
Here's one, looks like it's from a customer. He asks, are there items that you have refused for some reason regarding the fire hoses? There's discussion concerning possible contamination from fire residual chemicals. And his last comment is, I purchased from Damon and sent hundreds to him. Keep up the great work.
Well, thank you for the kind words, ma'am or sir. So yeah, I mean, fire hose is one of those that certainly when we present them for sale, there are people who will not buy from us or who give us heads up of the carcinogens and stuff because of the smoky life, number one, that they endured. I guess back to that is fire hose, to continue the example, has been very commercially successful. I suppose we lose some to that fear, that risk, but there's lots of applications where that, I guess, is not a clear and present danger, so to speak. And again, one of the biggest repurposes of old fire hose is boat dock bumpers. If you can imagine the lattice candy, the lattice hard candy at Christmas. That's what they do with old fire hoses on boat docks. So again, not a lot of human contact. So, you know, we use the old saying, we report, you decide. So we'll tell you what it was. It was a fire hose. You need to decide if it's appropriate for life number 2 or the repurpose you have in mind.
Okay. Do you communicate with the local state solid waste authorities and even the private sector facilities like you know, transfer stations and landfills? It sounds like there's, you know, they see stuff come across their scales every day that could be repurposed.
For sure. I mean, we try to communicate as much as budget will allow. We talk about, you know, it's like any business. I'm sure we're not nearly as well known as we would like to be. Unfortunately, the way or advertising and marketing works in America, if we had $100 million to spend on advertising, a lot more people would know about us, but you know, choose and pick our spots. It's opportunities like this, Wayne, to speak to a very good core target market, you know, that over time people will be able to refer us when something perfectly repurposable, a good candidate for repurposing, drives across the aforementioned landfill scales. Hey, let's not throw that away. Let's figure out, be creative about finding a second home for this.
Is shipping a barrier to making heavier materials available for repurposing? And not just heavier, but like oversized materials?
Absolutely, logistics is huge. The reason for the warehouses, as you can see, spread out across the United States is primarily a logistics thing. So when we started, I live in Denver, headquarters is in Denver. If we got a call from Boston, a lot of times we would have to say no. Now, after we opened Philadelphia, you could say yes to more things. Absolutely, there are things, an easy example, concrete, anything concrete, you only have about a 300-mile radius that you're going to be able to sell it. So when we take those in, you know, even though we have a national audience and there's many, many things, fire hose, parachutes, billboards, sell anywhere in the United States because you can afford to ship them. Concrete highway barriers, you have about a 300-mile radius to sell that barrier. It just doesn't make sense to take them from Louisiana and ship them to Fargo, North Dakota.
This question is, do you have any contact with the TerraCycle located in New Jersey?
I am familiar with that company. We have traded a couple of emails over time. We've never done a deal, but yes, I am familiar with the company. I think they have a different, but a great mission concept. Love the company.
Yeah, here's a suggestion from someone about some marketing grants that might be available out there to help you with your marketing of your business.
Okay, yeah,
So,
great suggestion.
Yep. I do quite a bit of waste audits and industries and companies, and I see, you know, especially the ones that deal with wood and finishing, they throw away a lot of sanding belts and, you know, grinding tools and things like that. Are there any ideas for repurposing like a big sandpaper belt?
Yeah, we've been offered those before. In fact, we've taken a few in over time. I can't say that, you know, we've had any great aha moments with them. I mean, typically we find a home for them other than the landfill. What I would say is, let's say we take in 100, but let's say in America there's 10,000 landfilled every year. I mean, with our limited success with say 100, I mean, we may be able to divert, you know, a small percentage of the total waste stream in the case of the sanding discs and sanding belts, but I would say repurposing would not come close to absorbing that whole waste stream in its entirety.
Right. Okay. All right. Looks like, well, here's one more. Any ideas for textiles?
Yeah, textiles is a really mixed bag. We've had some huge successes with some and some approaching, I wouldn't say miserable, but almost failures. Textiles is such a huge, broad term. I mean, it can come down to color. It can come down to size of roll. If it's a standard size, let's say that particular textile is, nationally, the standard is 60-inch wide rolls. If your rolls, for whatever reason, were custom made to 36, you really diminish the opportunity because all of a sudden you have a non-standard size roll. So textiles is huge, broad. It's really, truly case by case with textiles.
Yep. Yeah, we've actually had 2 or 3 webinars on textiles. So if you refer to our library on our website, you might get some more information on that topic. So looks like we're out of questions. So we're gonna wrap it up here. So thanks again for joining the webinar. And like I said before, the webinars will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. Thanks again for joining us. We hope you'll join us for next month's webinar, and please visit our websites for schedule updates. And again, Damon, thanks again for taking the time out to talk about your great business.
Wayne, thanks, and we look forward to being a resource.
Have a great day.